Welcome everyone to the Change Starts Here podcast. I'm your host, Dustin Odham. And in today's episode, we welcome Anne Chow, who's the CEO of AT&T Business. We talked to her today about the 7 C's of leadership. We talked to her about what leadership looks like in post, and I guess we're not in post-pandemic times, but coming up into post-pandemic times. And how do we take care of our people? How do we really enable authentic leadership? Knowing our authentic selves, as well as encouraging other people to live out their authentic selves. And how do we get people to live and lead passionately? It's a great conversation. Besides being an experienced leader, Anne's also a co-author of a book, A Leader's Guide to Unconscious Bias. She's got lots of interesting thoughts, great lessons for us. And the conversation today was just really unique and full of quotables. So I would just say, get your notebook ready or get your favorite notes app ready, because there's a lot of takeaways from this conversation. I appreciate you joining us. If you've not subscribed already, please subscribe. We need your support. We appreciate your support and enjoy this conversation. Thank you. Anne, thank you so much for being here. This is awesome to have you. As you know, our first question we ask everybody is, who are you and what do you love about what you do?
Yeah, Dustin, that's a great question. And thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. Man, the who are you is I don't know if that's like a trick question, because there isn't obviously just one answer to that. So I am a mom, I'm a daughter, I'm a wife, I'm a proud second generation American. I am a leader. I fancy myself a servant leader, and I am an agent of change.
Have you always looked at yourself as an agent of change, or is that something that you kind of grew into over time?
For sure, it's something that I grew into. You know, I have, in my many decades of life here and many decades of career out in the corporate environment, my vision for myself and those that I impact and that I support every day has definitely evolved. But for sure, I believe that everyone has an opportunity to be a change agent in a very, very positive way. And in fact, my guess is you're going to hear a couple of quotes from me, Dustin, throughout this whole conversation. But my absolute favorite one, which are my words to live by, is from Gandhi, and that is, be the change you wish to see in the world.
And so, I think you ended an article that I loved that you wrote recently. It was called, Post-Pandemic Times Will Require a New Brand of Leadership. Will you step up? And I'm pretty sure you ended the article with that in mind. What is it about these post-pandemic times that require a new brand of leadership? And what is that leadership from your eyes?
Yeah, it's, where we are today it's really profound, isn't it? I mean, I think one of the things about this moment in time in which we're all living is that the future is really uncertain. I don't think that there's ever been a time, at least in our history, in our generation's history, where there is so much uncertainty and there has been so much change virtually in every country around the world, every facet of society. This global pandemic has changed us, right? It has changed us as a society, and it's changed us as humanity. What we've learned over these last 20 plus months, if you can believe that it's been that long, depending on where you are in the world, it's been even longer. What's changed for us, I believe, is that we have realized the power of the human connection. In the early days of the pandemic, we had this phrase, you'll remember it, where we said, hey, we have to social distance. And I'm often, quoted as saying, because I believe this wholeheartedly, that I wish we didn't call it that. I wish we called it physical distance, because that's actually what we meant. Right? What we realized very, very quickly is that what we actually need is social connection. And what keeps us going, what keeps us alive, what gives us joy, what fuels our health, right, in all kinds of ways, our overall well-being, is the power of our human connection. And so as a result of that, what we have all learned, leaders of all shapes and sizes, industries, roles, whatever, right? We have all learned as leaders that there is something to be said for ensuring that the acknowledgement, the understanding, the set of actions that you take when you realize that all business, all education, everything is fueled by the human connection. It's not the other way around. That in many ways is somewhat liberating, right? But as a result, what it means is that in post-pandemic, and we are not by any stretch post-pandemic, right? We're still very much in it. that we need we need evolved leadership. Our leadership styles of what has gotten to us where we are up until this point will not be sufficient for charting the path for a much brighter and a much stronger future. And that's really what was the impetus of me writing that op-ed, that article.
Great. So what are the things that got us here, and what does it look like to lead now? I mean, what are some of the basic structures that you've seen of this worked really well the last 50 years? This is going to have to be the case if we're going to be successful in the next 50.
Yeah. So one of the key things here, and again, you got to keep in mind that my orientation, and this has actually always been the case, even when I was, a leader when I was young, right? When I was, in high school even, or in junior high, right? Leadership in my mind has always been about people, right? And I would even tell you that I had this somewhat traditional view. A little bit of this is cultural, a little bit of it is generational. I am an old Gen Xer. Is that leadership comes from a position or a title, right? You have to be captain of your tennis team. You have to be president of your band. You've got to run the student council or be on the the school board or whatnot. And what I feel that we have learned, I can tell you that I have certainly learned this over the course of my career, but have seen it come to life over these last 2 years, is that leadership is really about a mindset, and leadership is really a choice. Leadership has nothing to do with titles or position in any way, shape, or form, actually. Leadership very much is a choice, and every single person, I believe, across the country, across the world, has an opportunity to lead in some way, right? At every stage of their life, right? And in any number of capacities. I think in the old days, we naturally looked to positions of power traditionally, right? Positions of authority traditionally, whether it was our teachers, our professors, our bosses, right? The heads of our church, if religion is a thing, right? For you, right? If you have some kind of structured faith, our elders even, right? Within our family, right? And so what is required now, though, it is not to say that those traditional leadership roles are not important. They definitely are, but we need to seek leadership from all sources and all people in every stage of their life. So that to me is really one of the grounding factors. And we have certainly seen it, with this pandemic, in terms of how business models were severely disruptive, how long-told processes of even drug approval, right? When you think about the vaccination process, right? I mean, so many rules, if you will, were broken in order to accelerate progress and save lives, quite frankly, right? And so we have seen that crisis. This is actually another thing that I mentioned in that article, right? There is a saying, an old saying that says, crisis develops great leaders. I believe that crisis reveals great leaders, right? Because in crisis, we sort of throw out all of our traditional roles and we lean in, right? I mean, those leaders will lean in no matter what, right? And so those are just some of my thoughts on the past styles of leadership versus what is required now to build winning teams, right? Build environments where you're truly inspiring people and you are encouraging them and supporting them to move forward. One of the reasons why I've always fancied myself a servant leader, if you will.
So, I mean, that's something that is clear in any research done on you, is that people around you look at you as that. So it's not just you saying it. I feel like a lot of people who've had the privilege of working alongside you have said that's you're authentic and you serve others well, which is really refreshing to hear. One of the things that I find challenging for some leaders, especially as you get more and more people, you get to steward more and more people, is you have 30,000 people under your leadership. It's clear you're a servant leader and you want that, but sometimes that may get lost somewhere down the chain in terms of the feel. What are some structures or systems you try to put in place so that you're empowering people to be leaders, no matter what their position is in that 30,000 employee room?
Yeah. So Dustin, I will admit, I get this question quite a bit, right? Which is, how do you become a leader of the people? How do you develop an environment where people feel that they can be their most authentic self, right? And it's sort of really logical, isn't it? Just an aside on authenticity, because I think this is such a critical part of education today and building really robust educational environments, is if you're not being your most authentic self, right? How can you be your best self, right? How can you realize your potential at an individual level, at a team level, at an organizational level, at a company level, if you're not enabling every single member of that team or that organization to be their true self, right? And this is, it sounds easy, but it's not, right? It's not easy. So how have I done it over the years? It really gets back to where we started this conversation, which is being very conscious of the power of human connection. One of the things that I learned fairly early on, and I really credit my business school experience for sparking this in me, because I went to college for engineering largely, right? So I characterized myself in my early days as an introverted engineer, but I knew that there was something more, right? Not that I didn't love technology or I didn't love science and math and all that good stuff, but I knew that I wanted to do more. I wanted to be about an impact, and I wanted to be about outcomes. And I quickly realized that meant that I had to be about people, right? And if you're going to be about people, and if you're going to be a leader of the people, then you must understand the art and the science of building relationships, right? Which means that you've got to figure out how to do that, even if you have tens of thousands of employees, even if you have one employee, or 3 members of your team, whatever the number is. The key is, how do you build relationships? How do you create connection with every member of your team? So one of the things that I have learned, because quite honestly, Dustin, it's easy, right? If you're co-located with your team and you can count them on your fingers and your toes, right? Because it is then possible to actually build one-on-one relationships with every member of your team. But as that scales, both in complexity and number as well as geography, it is literally impossible to do so, right? I'd be disingenuous with you if I said, hey, yeah, I've actually had a chance to meet one-on-one with all 30 to 35,000 of my people all around the world, right? That's just not the case. So the question is then, how do you do that? How do you create that connection? And this is a characteristic that I feel that is key for great leaders. I have this framework, which we can dive into if you like, called the 7 C's of leadership. So one of the C's is communication, right? And so I realized, gosh, I don't know how many years, this is probably, I don't know, maybe 2 decades ago, that I could not scale myself, right? I realized that I was only hitting each market, and at that point, I don't think that I had the world. I think I had the country, right? In my role, I was like, I may only have a chance to go to Little Rock, Arkansas once every 2 years, right? There's certain markets that I'll hit over and over and over again, just given the demands of the business, but some markets I might not even ever get to, right, physically. So I was really racking my brain of how do I create that connection in a much more authentic way? Yes, of course, I do town hall meetings, and yes, of course, I do video broadcasts and all that kind of good stuff and take advantage of technology. But I actually started blogging. AT&T at the time had launched a social platform, a business social platform that we called at the time T-Space. And I knew that, I was like, hey, I'm going to look into this blogging thing. Again, being an engineer, I didn't really fancy myself a writer, but I was like, there's got to be a way that I can communicate with my team on a much more organic basis. So I actually got myself a social media coach, if you will, right, a business media coach, who said to me, I still remember this to this day. He said to me, if you're going to commit to do it, you must do it, but you must do it religiously. You must be dedicated to it. It needs to be frequent enough, but it can't be too frequent that people are thinking that you're being disingenuous. And so I was, of course, me being me, I said, well, what is the right frequency to do it? And he told me weekly. He's like, you need to blog weekly, right? And so I embarked on a journey of becoming a blogger weekly. And I'm proud to say that after, I don't do it weekly anymore, so confession right now, but for 8+ years straight, I blogged weekly to my organization every single week, even when I was on vacation. And sometimes it was really short, other times it wasn't. But what it did was, because you're looking for content, right? You know what I mean? So I found my voice. I found my ability to bring forth my authenticity. It still warms my heart to this day when I meet somebody or see somebody that I haven't seen in a long time, and they say, hey, how are your girls? I loved seeing pictures of your girls because it was like we were going through the same thing at the same time, right? And one of the things, or man, how's that dog? You're an Australian Shepherd lover, and so how's that dog of yours, and all this other stuff. And so to live your life in a bit more transparency, I think, than many leaders are comfortable doing, was a really big key. Was a really big key for me, because what it did was it created, and I didn't do it for this reason, but it was an outcome that was gold, right? Which was, I was creating an environment where leaders were actual, like, normal people, right? That I talked about some of the trials and tribulations of my life, right? And it made leadership more accessible, if you will, right? And it made me a little bit more relatable. I like to think, and it helped to create that human connection, even if I might never see that person to shake their hand or give them a hug or do any of those things that we so love doing, but have been removed from doing given this global pandemic, right? I mean, is so much of what we miss. So it's really all about how to create that human connection, that social connection, using a plethora of technologies, using a plethora of modalities, if you will, because it's just as important one-on-one as it is, 1 to 30,000 or 1 to 100,000 or whatever the case may be, right? So
well, along this path, there's a quote that I love of yours that says, people don't have a personal life and a professional life, they have one life. And I feel like so often I see leaders, even in the education space, where we feel like we've got to get results, and I just need my teachers to be teachers, and I just need them to get the results. How can we help people recognize that, like, it's really hard or almost impossible to separate professional and personal life, and we have to serve people in their whole life as leaders?
Yeah, so a couple thoughts on this. I want to give a shout out to one of my very best bosses that I ever had, because this was early on in my career. I want to say it was maybe 4 or 5 years into my career. So I was like a young pup. Okay, I worked for this amazing leader. Later on in her career, she retired, and she retired way earlier than any of us thought that she should or that she would. Okay. And I remember speaking at her retirement party and listening to her about why she did it. And it was this exact point, right? Which is, I have a personal life, and I don't have two lives. There's a personal side of me, there's a professional side of me, and I shouldn't have to choose. So I'm choosing my whole life, right? And I'm choosing my life such that right now, what's most important to me is not this. And I thought that was so incredibly courageous. And it was like a light bulb went on in my head. Now, that said, the business that AT&T is in, right? We create connections through, incredible connectivity solutions. We sell the technology and services that blend your life, right? That allow you to be and enable you to be connected, whether you're a business, or an individual or a family or whatnot, right? So in so many ways, the technologies that we have today are part blessing and part curse, right? So it becomes even more difficult to draw that line, right? Or figure out how to balance the use of these technologies and know, when do you need downtime, when do you not, and how do you use some of this technology more for good, right? And we see this I have 2 Gen Z daughters, right? I see it in their generation. I see it in the generation that comes after them. I think they're calling it Gen Alpha, where they're on all the time. They're connected to everything at all times, and it's good and it's bad, right? I mean, and so how do you do that? So how do you think of somebody, and how do you focus on their entire well-being? And if you reflect on some of the comments that I made earlier, I absolutely believe that if somebody isn't well, or if they're not being their true self, they're never going to be the best team member ever, right? They're never going to be able to unleash the power of their brain, the power of their heart, the power of their hands. These are all figuratively speaking, of course, right? And isn't that what we all want, right? All each of us want, I believe, on some visceral level, is to realize our fullest potential, right? And this is something that my parents instilled in me when I was very little, right? I mean, they were always pushing. And it wasn't about being the best. It was about being my best. And these are lessons that I've tried to impart on my children, right? Which is all I want you to do and dream for you to do is to realize your fullest potential, right? And that's right. That's what each of us have been given, this incredible life to live, right? I mean, no two people are the same. And so I think for me, it has been part of my persona, part of my own leadership development to figure out, all right, Dustin, I'm sure you've encountered this throughout your career as well. When somebody asks, well, how are you? And they don't actually really care. You can actually tell, right? You're like, don't even, this is why you say, well, fine. Okay. Well, how are you? Right. It's just, or how's your family? Well, you've never actually ever asked me about my family. So you actually really don't care. So don't ask. Right. So I think a lot of this it has to be genuine, right? I mean, it has to be genuine, and you have to figure out ways to bring that out in people. Look, not everybody will want to talk about their family. In fact, for many years, I specifically suppressed it. Why did I suppress it? Because I believed that there was an immense amount of bias, right? As a female of color, if you will, right? Being one of the only or one of the first to do any number of things in my career, I didn't want it to be a handicap for me, quite frankly, right? And I'd been around enough to realize that sometimes your differences are viewed not necessarily as strengths, right? So I work hard to create an environment where people can, if they want to, right, talk about it, right? Talk about their whole lives, right? I mean, I do it, I do it frequently. I just, it's probably just simply part of my personality now and my approach. But I find that if you do, and it comes from a genuine place, then others will become more comfortable about it as well. So
you brought up your daughters a couple of times, and we have an education-focused podcast. When you think about the future of work and the future of graduates, what are the most important skill sets? You can limit it to 3, you can go probably to 10. I'm sure you've got a lot in your head, but like, what are those main skill sets you really want your kids to have as they go take on the world?
Yeah. So, I think foundationally character and integrity, right, serve really at the core, right? And, to have principles and values, right, are the most foundational, right? Now, typically speaking, this can happen and is expected to happen within any given family unit, right? But we also have to keep in mind that not every one of our students, not every one of our youth come from home environments where that's where they're going to learn values and character, right? So I do think that there's an important role that the education system plays in demonstrating and in educating what's right? From a moral perspective, from an ethical perspective, we can look back in history and find any number of examples. One, that was not the case, right? We can look at today and see examples of that is not the case. And I feel that part of the responsibility of educators and the administrators who support the educators who support the students, right? Because it is an ecosystem, right? That forms our educational systems, if you will. You've got to work in open transparency, right? There's nothing different about it in terms of the characteristics of great leadership. Whether you're in education or whether you're in the private sector, right, or whether you're in corporate America, if you will, right? Many of what I talked about are relevant. So character and integrity and those underlying values are important, right? You have to be able to talk about times when it was not the case, right? And you can see where it leads, right? And so I think that's very important for us to look at that and to learn about it, because otherwise history repeats itself. Right? I mean, that's part of the issue with unconscious bias, right? Is that if you don't bring it to the surface and make it conscious, you can never reframe it. And it will always be there under the surface, impacting your thoughts, impacting your words, and impacting your actions and decisions, right? And so that's one key thing is just character and integrity. Another one would be competence, right? I'm slowly trickling my 7 C's of leadership for you, by the way, Dustin, and for your audience.
You can actually go there after that. I'll ask you.
So competence, but what's it mean to have competence, right? One of the things that I wish I knew coming out of school into the workforce was that life is not binary, right? There is no yes and no and absolutes in so many different things, right? And so this whole idea of, well, hey, I know it all and I have mastered this subject, so I am the expert. Look how quickly technology is innovating. Look how quickly the sciences are innovating, right? I mean, human ingenuity can be seen in every facet of society, right? Whether it's how we approach our planet and climate change, and and doing the right thing environmentally, whether it is how we are approaching social and civil rights, right, and ensuring that every voice matters and every voice is heard, and so competence, though, is situational, isn't it? Right. So you have to have a set of competence for your role today. I need to have a set of competence for my role today. But our role yesterday was different than our role today, which will be different than our role in the future. So what is the characteristic then? The characteristic that I feel is really foundational, that must come out of our educational systems, is this passion for learning, right? This commitment to lifelong learning, right? I actually was kind of my daughters would both tell you this, both my husband and I are engineers, so we are admittedly STEM biased, okay? And it's not because, hey, we believe that engineers are going to solve the world's problems, even though many of them do, but we have this view that getting a degree in STEM helps shape a way of thinking, a way of an approach, right, that involves qualitative assessments, the quantitative assessments, right? I attribute so much of how I approach problems today to my underlying education, right, which was not about learning about, digital signal processing or whatever, right? It was really about how to start that first set of foundation of becoming a lifelong learner, right, and becoming somebody who is committed to learning constantly from every situation, not even just from books or from courses or from certificates, but to learn from people, right? And that actually has been one of my greatest joys in my career and my life, is just, I approach almost every situation as a situation for learning, even in the darkest of situations. So I think that commitment to continuous learning and having that characteristic for our students when they come out of school is so important. Then I would say another one is courage, right? Now, what is courage in the context of a young student or a young adult, or somebody that is youth, right? You don't necessarily think about courage in their sense, but what I would say is this, is that when I reflect on my experience, that for me, it was just sort of this grit and resilience that, and I don't know if it's because I'm a second generation American, my parents came to this country with like nothing. And so I have a very big aperture for risk, right? I don't believe in failure. I believe that there's success and learning, right? And, unless you choose to just stay down, I literally don't think that there's anything, I don't think that there's such a thing as failure, because everything that happens to you in that moment, it may feel terrible. And I've had many of those times. If you learn from it and you pick yourself up and you move on, it shapes who you are. So I think with our children and with youth, we have to somehow encourage them to develop that grit, to develop that resilience, right? Which, as an adult, it turns into courage in a way, right? When you say to a young kid, right, if I said to my kids, "Hey, I need you to be courageous," I don't think that, because they haven't had enough of practical world experience to understand what courage is. But when you get knocked down and get back up again, every kid can relate to that, right? Every kid can relate to, hey, look, this is a moment in time. This does not define you, right? How you respond to it, how you react to it, how you use it to become better and stronger, and what you learn to do and not to do, right, from this helps shape who you are and who you can be, right? So I would say that's the other one, if you will, Dustin, that I think is so important with our kids. And when you look at some of these generations, and the trophy generation, where it used to be, hey, if you won the soccer tournament, you would get a trophy. Right now, they all get trophy, right? And so I think a lot of this is not really doing our kids a service if we try to shelter them in a bubble, because that's not the world, right? That's not the way the world works. The world is changing, right? Whether it's the demographics of the world, the environment of this one planet that we live on. I mean, it's all changing. And don't we want our next generation of leaders, which is how I view the youth of today, are the leaders of the future? Don't we want them to be resilient? Don't we want them to be courageous? Don't we want them leaning forward as opposed to looking back or holding back? Because that's how progress is made. So.
Yeah, I don't want to take too much of a political stand, at least in terms of like local school politics, but I was catching up with an old friend this weekend, and he used to be an administrator and a basketball coach at a local high school where they had a no cut policy. And to me, that was just like, I understood like the heart behind it, but it was a travesty because that cut could do one of two things. If my son or daughter got cut, they could either learn to get better to make sure they don't get cut again, or they could find out they have unique talents in another area that they even sought to pursue. And so when you say everyone gets a trophy, I do struggle with that mentality, not because, I'm not attacking the people that believe it with the heart behind it, but we've got to figure out a way to get kids with grit, right? And understanding what the real world is like.
Yeah, and that gets to the competence piece, right? Which is, hey, look, you're well qualified for your job today. I'm well qualified for my job today. If we switch jobs, my guess is you're probably not qualified for mine, and I'm not qualified
certainly
for
not.
Right?
Certainly not.
No. But that gets to the competence is something that, and this is actually this is actually the foundation for the speed of trust, right? From Stephen M. R. Covey, right? Character and competence must go hand in hand to build a foundation for trust, and we mistaken trust often with character alone, right? But for me to trust you, Dustin, it's situational, right? I mean, I'm entrusting you for us to have this professional and lovely and engaging conversation, right? Now, will I trust you to, if I tear my other rotator cuff, am I going to trust you to operate on my shoulder? No, right? Because while you have great character, you are not competent for that leadership task at hand. And so I'm a huge fan of Speed of Trust. For me, it really helped articulate and frame up so many things that I had observed, so many things that I had worked to practice around leadership. So
yeah, to go to that down that line, because I know our time's coming close to an end. You're a self-proclaimed motivation junkie, and so I know you like good books, good quotes, and inspirational speakers. What are either some of the books or speakers that have inspired you the most in your career or are inspiring you lately? They could be podcasts, they could be anything. I'm just curious in terms of where you get about leadership from.
Yeah. So God, there's so many. Okay. So I'm going to give you a couple of them, and I'll give you a couple that I've actually shared with my broader organization. Okay. One I touched on is grit. Okay. So, Angela Duckworth is the author of the book called Grit. She is the one who years and years ago did an early TED Talk on this topic of grit and the fact that the most common attribute of successful leaders was not IQ, it was not EQ, it wasn't any of these other things, right? It was actually grit, right? And so Angela and her book, I think, are very super, super helpful, right? Especially if it sounds kind of very soft. Like, well, what is grit and how do I teach it and how do I think about it, right? And how do I instill in my team, in myself, in my children, and those that I care about, this notion of effort and resilience, right? And perseverance, if you will. So that's one. Another one this year is actually what we did with my leadership kickoff this year was, and I'm a longtime massive fangirl here, is Renee Brown. Okay, and so I had an opportunity to do a fireside chat with Renee Brown for my organization, and I mean, I was like major girl crushing on her before, but now, afterwards, why do I love Renee? And I love anything that she writes and everything that she says and anything that she says. One, she is real. I mean, talk about authenticity personified, right? I love the fact that she's a qualitative researcher, because I also think that sometimes we get so caught up in the numbers and it's all this mumbo jumbo, right? That's not Renee, right? I mean, Renee's practice, her teachings, her philosophy, her approach is derived in other ways, right? I mean, it's in this idea of qualitative research, which I think is incredibly powerful, right? And is more of an emerging science, if you will. It's almost an oxymoron than quantitative research, right? I mean, you do need both, right? But so I think with Renee, I find her incredibly motivational, and I am all over her podcasts and her books, and her social media accounts, and all of her stuff. I love Adam Grant also, right? Love everything he's written. A couple of his books really helped reframe my thinking. I particularly love Give and Take, or Give or Take. And so I'm a huge fan of his as well. So, it's not just all kind of really classic, very professional educators or academics or thought leaders. I'll throw one name out there, and I think it's I love him because he's so irreverently brilliant and is always provocative, and that's Scott Galloway. So I love listening to his stuff too. I mean, it always makes me think, and I'm always like, dang, just because, again, I do it to provoke the provocative side of my brain, right? And yeah, he can be very salty. He can be incredibly negative, right? He can be incredibly caustic, but every voice matters, right? And his voice, to me, is one that it stimulates me to think differently many times, right? It really has me pondering certain things and certain issues in a very different way, and I find that to be very, very refreshing. So
absolutely. Well, I know music is a big part of your past and probably current. I mean, those who don't know, you were classically trained in Juilliard, right, to be a concert pianist. Mm-hmm. And so music's probably a big deal in your world. One of the questions we've been asking every guest this season is, what music is on your current playlist? Whether it's like your workout playlist or, walking around the neighborhood or just driving around the city. I know that you probably got some high traffic commutes in Dallas. So I'm curious, what is on your current playlist?
Yeah. So this might be a surprise to people, having been a classically trained pianist, which I don't play anymore, by the way. So I'll get to it in retirement someday, is my aspiration. So what is my jam? Like what is my go-to all of the time? And what would I listen to any time of any day? My number one favoriteest band is the Foo Fighters, who just got inducted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, by the way. Okay, best concerts I've ever been to as well. So I love them. So I could listen to them all day, every day long. I am also a Red Hot Chili Peppers fan. I haven't seen them yet, but I'm aspiring to, because they are coming to Texas next year. So, I'm trolling for some seats right now. I also love the Killers. Love the Killers. Love Alt J. Right. So I might be freaking some people out there because they're like, we would have never thought this stuff is on her playlist. But I also love so I'm a child of the 80s. So I have, so one of my playlists is kind of like God, I'm going to sound like a really seasoned person here, but, like my 80s clubbing stuff, yes. So, I am all about New Order, The Cure, Depeche Mode, that whole, I have like a whole, right. So I have that stuff. And then of course, I'm also an audiophile for the classics, right? Like classic rock, so, Eagles and Boston and Foreigner and just some, Led Zeppelin. I mean, just so I've got a fairly broad range of musical tastes. So
I just love that you appreciate all that. I actually had no idea where that would land when I asked you the question, given your background. No, sincerely, like I assume, if you're that talented a musician at an early age, you probably have a pretty broad taste of music because you've seen a lot and experienced a lot, but just never know. That's interesting. I would certainly have never guessed Foo Fighters. That is really cool. Another question we're asking is, we want to learn from people's habits and disciplines that they're doing on a daily basis that make them successful. What are those, daily or weekly habits or disciplines that you have that you think set you up to be the most successful version of yourself?
Oh gosh. So I would say, and I have to admit, Dustin, to our audience here, that I'm a little bit fallen off the wagon. Okay. So right now I would not say that I am my most healthy, well self, whether that's mind, body, or heart. When I feel that I am, so I'm going to answer it this way. Okay. Cause I want to be genuine with your audience here. So I don't want people to think I'm actually doing this right now, because I'm not, and I'm trying to get back on the wagon. Okay.
Yeah.
So one is for sure physical fitness, right? I do think that, when I think about when I operate at the best, I have some regular form of physical activity, high intensity. For me, it's got to be high intensity. What is my jam? My jam is fitness boxing. Okay. And it is because it is a complete mental, emotional, and physical release. You can't do it if you're multitasking in your brain. You absolutely cannot do it. So I am working to get back. I'm probably like, I fell off the wagon for maybe about 4 or 5 weeks. So I'm struggling to get back, but I will get back. I would also say that some of your own mental time, right? So whether it's you like sitting around listening to music, or you love reading books or cheesy magazines, or binging some mindless show, I say power to you, right? I mean, whatever it is that you need for that mental release, right, is so important. And don't have anybody judge whatever it is for you, right? I was just talking to one of my daughters last night about Squid Games, which of course is this, #1 Netflix, a show that's out there, right? And I was saying, hey, have you watched it yet? She's like, no, I haven't yet. And for me, it took me a while. Like, it had to get really explosive, super popular for me to then, okay, carve out the time, because it's subtitles, right? And so you actually have to pay attention to it. You can't, it's not a binge experience that you can multitask in, right? Because then unless you are fluent in Korean, of course, right? Which I am not. So whatever it is, right? And for me, it varies. Sometimes it'll be like, if I have a lot of travel, I'm one of those few people who rarely like to work on an airplane. I feel like that should be the sanctity of some time, right? I love to read on an airplane. So I might do some work reading. I might do some, cheesy magazine reading. I might read, a bunch of books or whatnot, right? So for me, airplane time is my sort of Zen reading time, right? And so whatever it is for you, I think you've got to have that mental release from everything, right? But only what it is, right? And because for me, one of the aspects is reading. I do think, to the earlier comment that we made about lifelong learning, is an important attribute for all leaders across all stages of their life. You've got to figure out a way with which to absorb different stuff, okay? And whether that's podcasts, whether it's actually reading lots of different things, whether it's books, magazines, periodicals, newspapers, right? I mean, most of this stuff is now digitally enabled, right? Not a lot of people like the actual tactile piece anymore, I suppose. Or if it's putting yourself in situations where you're meeting different people, right? And I know it's hard, it's hard. A lot of times you just don't have the time to do so. But if you find yourself getting too comfortable in your routine, you got to do something to shake it up. Because when you're comfortable, it actually means that you're not growing, right? And you're not challenging yourself enough, whether that's in your physical activity, whether that's in your mental activity, in your emotional activity and engagement. And each of us kind of know that for ourselves, right? We know, I'm kind of in a rut, right? Well, what is this rut? Is this rut a physical rut? I've been doing the same workout and my body has plateaued and I'm not challenged anymore. Am I in this mental rut? Like, man, I'm just so tired of being exposed to this same thing over and over, right? I'm like, the news I watch is all the same, right? The stuff that I'm exposing to myself to is all the same. Let me just pick up something totally different, or let me go be in a different place, right? I think travel is wonderful. Now that travel is picking back up again safely. Put yourself in a very different environment than you're used to, right? I mean, challenge yourself in that way, and that's how you stay fresh and lean forward into what the future will bring and be part of it.
One more thing before I let you go. I know that a lot of leaders focus on how they can give of their time and energy to certain causes. And I believe one of the causes that you either presently involved with or just were recently involved with was the Girl Scouts of the USA. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I served on the national board for a bunch of years. Yeah.
What was it about the Girl Scouts mission that had you so attracted to what they do?
Yeah. And I do think too, Dustin, I mean, thank you for bringing this up, because this really gets to the root of what is happiness and what is success. There is this great book. I'm going to diverge a little bit, then I will answer your question. There's this great book called The Only Way to Win. It's by Jim Lair. And in it, he unpacks what's it really mean to be successful, and what's it really mean to be winning? He's got a couple of different case studies in there, but one of them is Andre Agassi. And the whole thing behind the premise of Jim's teachings and research is we are truly most happy and winning when we're helping other people, right? It gets to where we started this whole conversation, and the power of the human connection, the power of social connection, right? And that no matter how much money and how much fame and how much titles or all the stuff that you have, right, at the end of it is the relationships that you have, right? And the people in your life and the people whose lives you're impacting in a positive way, right? Okay, so for me, the Girl Scouts is actually a pretty easy one in terms of one for me to get involved in and be committed to. I was a Girl Scout growing up. And so I'm actually now a lifetime member. I'm a lifetime Girl Scout. Both of my daughters had experience in Girl Scouts. For me, when I was young, when I was, in, I don't remember, junior high, elementary school, which is when I was doing it, it taught me the importance of service, right? So I have this part of me that was shaped by my early experiences as Girl Scouts. I also like to say that my very first sales job was selling Girl Scout cookies, right? And absolutely true statement, right? But I didn't think of it like that then, and who knew that half my career would be spent in B2B selling, right? So that said, why was it important to me? There are very few organizations that are of that scale that are solely dedicated to the unique challenges and opportunities associated with girls. As being a girl myself, being the mom of two girls, we are still not at a place, across society where we have achieved equality and equity in every aspect of life, right? And so I felt a lot of conviction around being part of the growth, being part of the strategy, being part of the support for the Girl Scouts of the USA. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. During my tenure there, on the board, the Girl Scouts launched, a series of STEM badges, actually, cybersecurity and data analytics and others, right? And I'm thinking to myself, this is not the Girl Scouts of like when I was there and I had like my home ec badge, right? But that just helps inform, what my passion, was and is, and I am, yes, a supporter and a proud lifetime member of the Girl Scouts.
That's awesome. Well, I committed, we started to end this at the right time. We are at that time. Your time is very precious. Is there anything you want to leave everyone with, or are we good moving on? Because you've left us so much to think about today, and I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, no, Dustin, that's great. Since your audience is one that is around education, if I could, I'm going to ask that you all indulge me in another quote. Okay.
Absolutely.
And this is one that I actually posted on my social, because my town happens to be going through a school board election right now. And it's a Malcolm X quote. So I'm going to read it because I want to get it right, because I think it's so powerful. And I would want for everyone who's in our audience here who is in education to really think about this. And I'll close with some comments about it. And that is, education is the passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. Okay. And that quote to me is so powerful. Since you brought up Girl Scouts, I'm going to give you one that's from also Juliet Gordon Low, who's the founder of the Girl Scouts. This is one that I carry with me all the time. It's kind of like my Be the Change with Gandhi. And that is, the work of today is the history of tomorrow, and we are its makers. Okay. So for educators out there, your role in society is so vital. You are being entrusted with, and you have chosen the most noblest of professions, and that is to focus on the minds of today. Those minds of today are the ones that are going to have to be the leaders of the future in every sector of the world, right? Whether it's politics, whether it's in the private sector, every industry, whether it's in law enforcement, future educators. So there is no more noble profession than what you guys are all about. And I, for one, as a parent, don't take that lightly. I, for one, as a lifelong learner, don't take that lightly, or even as a corporate leader. And so in the times when things may seem really pressure-filled, because, yeah, some parts of what we're going through as a society right now seem a little crazy, right? remember what your mission is, and your mission are those students, right? And there is nobody more important to the future of humanity, to the future of our country, to the future of your local community, my local community, to the future of this world and this one planet we live on, than our next generation of leaders who are the students of today. So I want to say a special thank you to all of the educators out there, including the administrators, anyone who has anything to do with education, whether it's formal K through 12, community-based, higher ed, whatever the case may be. You are in the most noble of professions. And I, for one, thank you for your commitment and your leadership.
Well, that is awesome. Anne, this has been awesome. Thank you for bringing your energy. I now understand how you get to lead so many folks. You don't lack for energy and focus. So I really appreciate you bringing it here, and look forward to hopefully our paths crossing again in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Dustin.
Thanks. Bye. Please support us by subscribing to our YouTube channel, podcast on Apple or Spotify, and help us celebrate the beautiful, messy work of shaping human potential.